After years of living under our HOA's iron grip, they finally crossed the line, raising my fees over having too many cars in my own driveway. What they didn't know was that I had been quietly buying up properties in the neighborhood for years, and now it was time to show Linda, our power-hungry HOA president, who really owned this community. But would she accept defeat gracefully when I revealed my secret? Welcome to my channel. Subscribe if you want more HOA takedown stories. I never wanted trouble with the HOA, I really didn't, but when I found that bright orange notice taped to my front door last Tuesday morning, I knew this was war. My hands trembled as I read it. Immediate HOA fee increase, $500 per month. Violation, excessive vehicles on property, 3 cars. That's what this was about. My work truck, essential for my construction business, my wife's SUV for her night shifts at the hospital, and the used Honda we had just bought for our daughter's 16th birthday. 3 perfectly normal cars. In our own driveway. Through the kitchen window, I spotted Linda Marshall, our HOA president, on her morning inspection stroll, clipboard in hand, measuring tape dangling from her wrist. She stopped at my driveway, pulled out her phone, and started snapping pictures. Again, the 3rd time this week. "Honey, she's out there again," my wife Emily called from the living room. "Maybe we should just park the Honda in the garage," she suggested. "No," I said firmly, pouring my coffee. "We're not hiding our daughter's car like we're doing something wrong." Our garage was packed with Emily's medical supplies and my work equipment, just as we had explained at the last HOA meeting, a meeting where Linda smirked as I pleaded my case. "Rules are rules, Mr. Carter," she had said, barely looking up from her phone. "Maybe if you can't afford proper garage storage, this neighborhood isn't for you." What Linda didn't know, what none of them knew, was that for the past 5 years I had been systematically acquiring properties in the development through my real estate investment company. Each purchase was made under different LLCs, concealing my growing influence. It started as a smart investment, but now it was something more, a strategy, a way to fight back. I stepped outside to get the mail, taking my time. Linda pretended to inspect Mrs. Avery's rose bushes while watching me from the corner of her eye. Poor Mrs. Avery had been fined last month for having roses deemed too vibrant and disrupting neighborhood color harmony. My phone buzzed. A message from my lawyer. "Property closing complete. You now own 67% of the development." I smiled and tucked my phone away just as Linda power-walked toward me, clipboard clutched to her chest. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "I trust you received our notice about the vehicle violation." "I did, Linda," I said, keeping my tone even, "and I have some questions about the legal basis for this fee increase." She waved a dismissive hand. "The board has full authority to implement fees as needed. Perhaps if you attended more meetings you'd understand how these things work." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Little did she know I had attended every single meeting for the past 5 years, through proxy representatives who owned the homes I had secretly acquired. I had sat back, quietly documenting every one of Linda's selective enforcements, every questionable fee, every abuse of power. As she turned to leave, heels clicking on the sidewalk, she called over her shoulder, "Oh, and the board is calling an emergency meeting tonight, 7 p.m. sharp. We'll be discussing additional measures for problem properties." I watched her walk away, then pulled out my phone and texted my lawyer. "Time to prepare the documents we discussed. Linda's making her move tonight." Just then my daughter pulled into the driveway. Linda stopped, took more photos, and strutted off. My blood boiled, but I kept my cool. Tonight would change everything. Inside, I spread out property maps on my desk, each lot carefully highlighted. 5 years of planning, of gathering evidence, of watching Linda's reign of HOA terror grow worse. Tonight she would learn that her biggest mistake wasn't targeting my family, it was underestimating me. The community center's meeting room was packed. Every seat was filled with neighbors, whispering among themselves. Linda had outdone herself, even hiring a professional photographer to take pictures of my driveway at different angles, making 3 normal-sized cars look like some illegal parking lot. "Let's begin," Linda announced, tapping her sparkly pink gavel on the podium. She had deliberately scheduled this emergency meeting on a Tuesday evening, knowing most working families wouldn't be able to attend. I made sure to be there. Sitting quietly in the back, I watched her usual performance unfold. "As you can see from these professional photographs," she began, clicking through a PowerPoint presentation, "Mr. Carter's property has become a used car lot." A few gasps from her loyal followers, the same ones whose Christmas decorations stayed up until March without consequence. Mrs. Rodriguez, my elderly neighbor, rolled her eyes. Last month, she had been fined because her grandson's car was in her driveway while he helped fix her roof. Mr. Chang, a high school science teacher, furiously took notes. He had received a violation notice for parking his car slightly over his own driveway line during a snowstorm. Linda clicked to the next slide, zooming in on my daughter's car. "This vehicle," she said smugly, "has been parked in the same spot for over 48 hours. She failed to mention that my daughter was home from college for the weekend." The meeting dragged on as Linda paraded bogus complaints from anonymous neighbors, cherry-picked property value statistics, and even weather reports suggesting my cars were causing excess snowdrifts. Then she pulled out a thick binder. "I've documented every instance of vehicles entering and leaving Mr. Carter's property over the past 3 months." My eyebrows shot up. She had been tracking my family's movements. Several neighbors shifted uncomfortably. That's when Sarah Jenkins, my next-door neighbor, stood up. "Linda, isn't this a bit excessive? They're just regular cars in a regular driveway." Linda's face reddened. "You're out of order. You haven't been recognized by the chair." It was my cue. I stood up slowly, adjusting my tie. "Point of order, Madam President." Linda's eyes narrowed. "You're not recognized, Mr. Carter." "Actually," I said, pulling out a folder, "according to HOA bylaw section 73, any property owner may raise a point of order regarding voting procedures." Silence. Linda's grip tightened on the podium. "Before we vote," I continued, stepping forward, "I believe it's important to review the HOA's current property ownership structure." I pulled out a large property map. "For the past 5 years, Sunrise Properties has been acquiring homes in this development." Linda's face paled as I placed my final document on the table. "As CEO of Sunrise Properties, I now own 67% of the homes in this neighborhood." A murmur rippled through the room. "Which means," I said, locking eyes with her, "I now control this HOA." Linda knocked over her gavel. Her husband George rushed to whisper in her ear. Her hands trembled as she realized who she had been messing with all these years. I smiled. "Now let's discuss those missing $50,000 in pool renovation fees." Been recognized by the chair. I watched as Linda's husband George started handing out copies of a new proposed bylaw. One that would limit each household to 2 vehicles and require garage parking only. The absurdity of it all almost made me laugh. Almost. "We'll now vote on the new vehicle restrictions and fee increase," Linda declared, not even bothering to allow discussion. "All in favor?" That was my cue. I stood up slowly, straightening my tie. "Point of order, Madam President." Linda's eyes narrowed as she looked at me over her reading glasses. "You're not recognized, Mr. Carter." "Actually," I said, pulling out my own folder, "according to HOA bylaw section 73, any property owner may raise a point of order regarding voting procedures." The room fell silent. I could see Linda's perfectly manicured nails gripping the podium tight. "Before we vote, I believe it's important to review the HOA's current property ownership structure." I started walking toward the front of the room, my shoes clicking on the linoleum floor. "You see, over the past 5 years, Sunrise Properties has been acquiring homes in this development." Linda's face started to lose its color as I pulled out a large property map. "And as CEO of Sunrise Properties, I thought it might interest everyone to know exactly who owns the majority of this HOA." I paused, making eye contact with each board member. "But perhaps we should discuss that after we review these questionable surveillance activities you've been conducting." The room erupted in murmurs. Through my peripheral vision, I saw phones coming out, neighbors recording every moment. Linda's hand trembled as she reached for her water bottle, knocking over her precious gavel in the process. That's when George rushed to the podium, whispering something in her ear. Her eyes widened as she finally realized who she'd been messing with all these years. The meeting room fell silent as I stood up. My heart was pounding, but my voice remained steady. Linda's smug smile started to fade as I pulled out my leather briefcase. "Before we vote on these new fees," I said, "I have something important to share with everyone." I clicked open my briefcase and removed a thick stack of property deeds, laying them one by one on the table. Each paper represented another piece of my secret plan coming together. The room buzzed with whispers as I arranged them in neat rows. "For the past 5 years," I continued, "I've watched this HOA board ignore serious maintenance issues while harassing good neighbors over tiny things. I've seen Linda here write up Mrs. Avery, who's 82 years old, for having a flower pot that was 1 inch too tall. Meanwhile, her friend Susan's bright purple fence somehow never got a single warning." Linda's face turned red. "That's not true. I enforce all rules fairly." She grabbed her water bottle, but her hand was shaking so much she spilled some on her designer blouse. I pulled up photos on the meeting room's big screen. "Here's Linda measuring my grass at 3 a.m. last Tuesday." The security camera footage was crystal clear. Several people gasped. "And here she is ignoring the Thompsons' violations completely, right after they hired her son's landscaping company." More whispers filled the room. I could see people starting to nod, remembering their own run-ins with Linda's selective enforcement. "But the most interesting thing I discovered," I said, picking up the stack of deeds, "is that through my company, Sunrise Properties, I now own 67% of the homes in this development." I paused as the meaning sank in. "That makes me the majority owner of the HOA itself." Linda jumped up, knocking over her chair. "You can't do that. It's not allowed." Her voice had gone squeaky with panic. I smiled calmly. "Actually, I can. I've had 3 different law firms review everything. It's completely legal." I pulled out another folder. "I also have signed complaints from 32 residents about harassment, selective enforcement, and suspicious fees." The room erupted. Mrs. Avery stood up, her voice shaking with emotion. "Last winter, they fined me $200 for not shoveling my walkway fast enough. I was in the hospital with pneumonia." Others joined in, sharing their stories. Linda tried to restore order, banging her gavel, but nobody was listening to her anymore. "I move to dissolve the current board," I announced. "We'll hold new elections with term limits and clear rules about conflict of interest. No more 3 a.m. grass measuring, no more selective enforcement." Bob Chang from 2 doors down raised his hand. "I second that motion." Soon hands were going up all around the room. Linda grabbed her designer purse and started toward the door. "This meeting is adjourned," she yelled. "You'll be hearing from my lawyer." "Actually," I said, still calm, "according to HOA bylaws section 7.3, you need a majority vote to adjourn. And I don't think you have that anymore." I gestured at the deeds spread across the table. "We're just getting started." She froze with her hand on the doorknob, realizing her power was slipping away. 20 years of ruling the neighborhood with an iron fist were coming to an end. "Now," I said, opening another folder, "let's talk about those mysterious pool renovation fees from last summer, the ones where $50,000 disappeared but the pool never got fixed. I have some interesting bank records to share." Linda slumped against the wall, her face pale. She hadn't noticed yet, but a local news van had just pulled into the parking lot. I had invited them to cover our community reorganization meeting. The next few hours would change our neighborhood forever, but first we had years of Linda's secrets to uncover, and I had every single receipt. My careful planning was finally paying off. And the best part? It wasn't over yet. I walked into my lawyer's office Monday morning to find 20 angry voicemails from Linda. She had discovered my company's property records over the weekend and was threatening to sue me for secretly taking over the neighborhood. I couldn't help but smile. She had finally shown her true colors. But Linda wasn't just angry. She was scared. That evening she went door to door spreading rumors that I was planning to turn our peaceful suburb into a parking lot for my car collection. Some neighbors actually believed her, especially after she showed them fake documents suggesting I had connections to a shady development company. I knew I had to act fast. My security cameras caught Linda sneaking onto my property at midnight, taking close-up photos of my car's license plates. The next day she filed a lawsuit, claiming I had broken HOA rules by purchasing properties through my company. She even tried to get an emergency court order to freeze my voting rights in the HOA. That's when months of careful planning paid off. My lawyer revealed our secret weapon, a detailed record of every HOA meeting for the past 5 years. We had videos of Linda giving her friends passes on their violations while harshly fining others. We had copies of checks showing she used HOA funds to renovate her own backyard. Best of all, we had emails where she bragged about using her power to keep undesirable elements out of the neighborhood. The judge's eyes widened with every piece of evidence. Linda's face turned red when we showed time-stamped footage of her measuring my grass with a ruler at 3 a.m. Her reign of terror was over, taking photos of my teenage daughter's car and placing threatening notes on my neighbors' doors. Linda Marshall had gone too far. Her lawyer started sweating when we presented proof that she had changed HOA records to hide her friends' unpaid dues. But the real shock came when 3 former board members stepped forward. They testified about how Linda had bullied them into approving unfair rules, admitted to targeting specific homeowners she didn't like, and even bragged about using HOA fines to fund her yearly trips to Hawaii. The courtroom grew eerily quiet as we displayed Linda's social media posts, mocking elderly residents who couldn't pay their HOA fees. There she was, lounging poolside in Maui, captioning her post, "Thanks to all my rule-breaking neighbors for funding this vacation. Keep those violations coming." Linda tried to defend herself, claiming she was just doing her job. But then we played the recording from last month's HOA meeting where she had screamed at Mrs. Avery, our 75-year-old neighbor, for having a bird feeder that was 2 inches too low. That was the moment Linda snapped. She jumped up from her seat, pointing an accusatory finger at me. "He's trying to destroy our perfect neighborhood," she shouted. "Do you know what kind of people will move in if we don't have strict rules? He probably wants to turn this into one of those communities where people can park wherever they want." The judge had heard enough. He not only dismissed Linda's lawsuit, but ordered a full audit of the HOA's finances. As we left the courthouse, my phone buzzed with messages from neighbors. Linda had just sent out a mass email announcing her immediate resignation from the board, claiming she was being forced out by big money interests. I watched her storm to her car, already typing furiously on her phone. I knew this wasn't over. Linda still had loyal followers in the neighborhood, and she wasn't the type to admit defeat easily. But for now, I had what I needed. Proof that our HOA president had been abusing her power for years and the legal authority to make real changes. The morning of the final court hearing brought a surprise. Linda had sent an army of news vans to my house, thinking public pressure would make me back down. But she had just given me the perfect stage. I straightened my tie, grabbed my documents, and walked up to the reporters with a confident smile. "Good morning, everyone. I'm Daniel Carter, and I'd love to show you something interesting about our HOA's financial records." I pulled out the color-coded spreadsheets my accountant had prepared, showing years of suspicious fees that always seemed to benefit Linda's closest friends. The reporter's eyes widened as I explained how single parents had been charged higher violation fees than her golf buddies. One reporter gasped when I showed security footage of Linda measuring my grass at 3 a.m. while her own yard violated every rule in the book. Inside the courthouse, Linda sat beside her expensive lawyer, wearing her signature fake pearl necklace and a smug smile. That smile vanished as soon as my lawyer began presenting evidence. We showed photos of Linda's own house breaking multiple HOA rules, her bright purple mailbox, her overgrown garden, and her son's 4 cars parked on the street. The judge leaned forward as we revealed Linda's secret Facebook group, where she bragged about targeting specific families. "Let's see how long the Carters last with these new fees," she had written. "Maybe they'll finally move and sell to someone more suitable." Linda jumped up to object but stopped cold when we played a recording from last week's HOA pool party. Her voice rang through the courtroom. "Of course I make up violations. How else can we keep control of who lives here?" The judge's gavel came down hard. Not only was Linda permanently removed from the HOA board, but she was also ordered to pay back every unfair fee she had collected. The look on her face when she heard the total, $147,892, was better than any revenge I could have planned. With my majority ownership, I helped create a new HOA board with real change. We elected 5 residents from different parts of the neighborhood, including Mrs. Rodriguez, whom Linda had tried to fine for cooking ethnic food, and Mr. Chang, whose beautiful garden Linda called too exotic. The changes came fast. Kids could now play basketball in their driveways. Gardens could grow vegetables, not just flowers. And yes, families could park more than 2 cars as long as they fit in their own space. 3 weeks later, I watched from my window as Linda's moving truck pulled up. She had sent a final letter to the neighborhood, claiming she was moving to a better community with higher standards. Nobody missed the irony when her new HOA slapped a parking ticket onto her windshield as she drove away. That evening, my daughter parked her car in our driveway, right next to my work truck and my wife's SUV. I installed a small sign we had all voted on: "Welcome to Carter Hills, where good neighbors make great neighborhoods." The next morning, I got an unexpected call. A TV producer had seen the news coverage and wanted to make a documentary about how we transformed our HOA. As I looked outside at kids playing freely in their yards and neighbors chatting over garden fences, I smiled, imagining Linda watching it from her new house with its strict 1-car garage rule. The best part? Our property values went up 15% in the first month after Linda left. Turns out, people really do prefer living in a neighborhood where they're treated with respect instead of ruled by fear. Some of Linda's old friends stopped by to apologize, admitting they had just been afraid of becoming her next target. We still have an HOA, but now it protects the community instead of policing it. Every month, we use the fees for things that actually matter: improving the playground, fixing the pool, helping elderly residents maintain their homes. We even started a community garden in the very spot where Linda used to take photos of so-called violations. As I filed away the last of the court documents, my phone buzzed with a text. It was from a resident in Linda's new neighborhood. "Hey Carter, we've got our own power-hungry HOA president here. Any advice?" I leaned back in my chair, thinking about how sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's showing others how to stand up for themselves.